Welcome back to part 3 of Basic Training for the Transitioning Military Veteran. In this part, we're going to be assessing your skills. This is John San Pietro, and I'm once again joined by Dr. Rich Shuttler. Dr. Rich, hello there.
Hi, John. How are you?
Doing well. Yourself?
I'm wonderful. Thank you.
Excellent. In this video, we're going to discuss recognizing the skills you have. We'll talk about taking an inventory of those skills and then assessing those skills based on your ideal transition. So let's just jump right in and let's talk about recognizing the skills you have. Now, this may seem to be a no-brainer. It may seem to be very easy, but believe it or not, it's a lot more difficult than it sounds because sometimes veterans don't realize some of the behaviors and the habits they learned many years ago in the military are not common outside of the military service. In other words, they don't realize that their skills are actually skills. Rich, when you came out of the Navy, you were probably surprised that a lot of people didn't have the day-to-day skills that you had developed after 22 years of service.
That's true, John. And I think a lot has to deal with in the military. You're constantly working within a system and within an organization. And so those skills, whether it be leadership or management skills, are often taken for granted from those when they get out of the military because they don't see that as something that's marketable, if you will. They don't see that as a hard skill that somebody's really interested in because from a day-to-day basis in the military, we do that all the time. And so it's really ingrained in us to understand the system, to understand the placement in the system, as well as also how to troubleshoot that system to make it better.
I think I think everybody has that. For example, I'm a very techie type of person, so computers and internet stuff and web programming comes very easy to me. And because it comes so easy to me and it's come so easy for such a long time, I sometimes forget that it's not such a simple thing for other people. I sort of take for granted that everybody has the same skill because I don't even see it as a skill anymore.
And when most people talk to you and they ask you what you do, you probably don't even relate to the skills that support the work that you do. I think that's the important point here is for people to realize it's those skills and abilities that we pick up along the way which really supports our expertise in the work that we do.
And I think that's a great point, and I'm going to keep referring back to that because in an effort to recognize some of those intangible skills, that's a really good way to sort of find them. How do the intangibles relate to the work that you do? I love that.
Well, there's three things I think that are important for the military members to remember as they're transitioning out, and it's what in the civilian community when they're looking for people to hire for jobs, they're always looking for knowledge, skills, and abilities. All too often people talk about the skills and they forget to really focus on the knowledge and the abilities that they have.
So while the tangible skills that you learned are often easy to recognize, obviously the intangible ones are not. So these are some really good strategies to help you recognize that. Think about the person you were before you went into military service versus who you are now. What's changed? What are the abilities that you've gained in addition to the skills? And again, think about it both in terms of the tangible as well as the intangible. I think too often we gloss over the intangible traits, but what you're going to find is that it's the intangibles that will often set you apart from everyone else who is, say, competing for a particular job.
That's very good, John, because those intangible skills are often what makes a difference when somebody actually does get hired and how soon they get promoted. And a lot of that deals with how well you're going to get along with people, how friendly you are, how approachable you are, and how trainable you are as well. So these intangible skills often are what makes a difference in getting a job, but also in retaining that job.
And let's be honest, the day-to-day discipline as well as the ability to handle high-pressure situations day to day it's not something that everybody can do. It really is a skill set that I believe sets military members apart from civilian. Again, it's one of those things I think people take for granted, because whereas a lot of military members exist in high pressure situations every day that they just start to assume are the normal day-to-day situations, that's not the experience of people outside of the military.
And we find that to be true, particularly when people are adapting and adjusting from the military going into the civilian workforce, is that quick day-to-day constant movement of fixing things and priorities and emergencies that need to be taken care of are not found within the civilian sector as much. And so therefore, a lot of times, those military people transition in the civilian world find things to be a little bit slower, and that can be a little confusing at first.
Do you find, Rich, in your experience, that military members, transitioning veterans, sell themselves short when it comes to their professional qualifications?
Quite often, yes, John, and that comes because when we're in the military, we're doing things on a day-to-day basis, and you don't necessarily see these skills develop. Now, whether you've been in the military 3 years, 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, those intangible skill sets of what we're talking about here are the things that often we take for granted and don't really see as an area of expertise or this knowledge that really matters in making one's abilities more than somebody else's when competing for a job.
It's really important to understand that when you first start to think about what skills you have, you're probably not going to recognize all of them. And that's why we're sharing these exercises with you in this lesson, because we want you to take the time to go through the steps so that you get a much more full and frankly more accurate picture of what it is you have to offer to the civilian marketplace. If you don't do that, you end up selling yourself short, as Rich was talking about, and that's the last thing that we want you to do, and probably the last thing that you want to do as well.
Couldn't say it any better, John.
So once you start to do this, once you start to ask the questions, the next thing that you want to do is you want to write it down. You always want to write these things down. We're going to take a skills inventory, basically. We're going to create a list of your skills. And I think you'll find it a lot easier to do this if you divide the list into the following categories. Your professional skills and experience. In other words, the tangible skills that you have acquired through your military service. Your habits and your behaviors. And these, again, are the supporting traits that you've developed as a member of the military that are probably being taken for granted right now by you. And then your personal experience and hobbies. You know, you never know what your personal experience and what the things you like to do in your spare time might contribute to a job. Again, when someone is looking at a resume, a lot of times it is that personal experience or it's the hobby that sets them apart. It's the thing that maybe makes you stand out. Maybe you have something in common with the person who's looking over your resume. You never know. But again, the better, the more accurate a picture you can give when you're listing these skills, the better chance you're going to get the job that you want, and the better chance it's going to be the right fit for you and for your ideal transition.
One thing to also mention here, John, is when somebody's taking their inventory of their skills, once they have them all laid out and they have focused on them, they can also see where perhaps they need some improvement or some gaps, if you will, that helps people understand that these are skills I have, and it opens up the opportunity to assess on that and say, well, gee, I may need to improve or get more skills and abilities in a certain area. So it actually becomes a reflection tool for looking forward to understand better perhaps what kind of training and education are still needed.
Absolutely, and that's something that we definitely will cover as we go through the steps, because it is a very important part of the process. So if you're having trouble with this, and again, it's not unlikely that you will have trouble. A lot of people do have trouble with this exercise. You can just ask yourself the following questions. What did you learn in the military? Write it down. What was your job? Write it down. What were your responsibilities? Write that down. What leadership role or roles did you play? Write that down. What were the characteristics necessary to successfully accomplish your tasks on a day-to-day basis? Write that down. What have you pursued in your off time? Write that down. Basically, what you want to do here is you want to write down as much as you can. Then you want to walk away from the list. Literally put it down and walk away and take a break. Let your brain reset. Go do something else. And then come back to the list in the next day or two and take another look. When you come back to that list, what you'll probably find is there are a few more things that you forgot to put down initially that you'll then be able to add to the list. So as you start to remember other things, add them to the list. Now, when you're finished, you should end up with a pretty impressive list. What you'll find, as we said before, is that there are probably many more skills on that list than you initially thought there would be. And that's the point of the whole exercise. What you want to do is make sure you take your time with this. By taking this inventory over 2 or 3 or 4 days, you're going to find that you have more marketable skills than you probably realized. And, you know, Rich, both you and I have seen clients who have rushed through these exercises because they want to get to the very end of it. They want to just keep moving and moving, but that can be very detrimental if they rush through it, right?
Of course. Because this is important to be able to look at oneself and say, what skills and abilities do I really have? In the case for me, as when I went through this, I did not realize all the extra skills I learned along the way because I never gave it any real thought. In the military, for example, we're constantly looking at moving from one place to another, whether it be in a change of a move where you're literally moving yourself and your family to another duty station, or for an exercise to move people places. So there's always this need to look at checklists. Almost everybody runs by a checklist in the military. There's a set plan, there's training, and all these things happen. And I never realized until I did the skills inventory to realize that I do have a certain amount of what's known as project management background in the civilian community, because in the military, I just said, you know, well, I'm used to planning. I'm used to making a calendar and figuring out who needs to be where and when, and if I was going on an exercise, what kind of equipment I needed to bring with me. And all those relate back to managing of inventory, supplies, having an understanding of supply and demand and what's available, what you can do. And these are innate skills that military people pick up, but unless you go through this inventory of your skills and realize what are the things that people actually do. And I realized quickly that I did have a great ability to plan and do improvements, because even in the military, with all the equipment we have, there's a thing called preventive maintenance. Whether it be on a Jeep or on a computer, we were constantly looking at maintaining the equipment in ideal condition to be able to perform its role that piece of equipment had to do. We were constantly training new soldiers, new sailors, as they would come into a duty station, as they come into a unit. We would provide and make sure they had training. So I didn't realize that I do understand how to create training programs, how to measure them, how to ensure success by those going through it. And these are all skills that are needed in the civilian community, but often we don't look at that's what we really have as far as our toolbox that we take with us when we leave the military.
Absolutely. And I'm always surprised myself when I am called upon to use a particular skill that I haven't used in a long time, I haven't really thought about in a long time. And then when I have a moment to reflect, I think, where did I learn that? and
Sure.
I realize it might have been something that I picked up many, many years ago that I, because I haven't needed to use it, I haven't used it, but it's in there. It's in that, as you said, it's in that toolbox. And the more we understand the tools that we have in our toolbox, the better.
And there's a saying, John, it deals with that toolbox, and I'm a big believer that I have several toolboxes. I have a leadership toolbox, I have a management toolbox, but regardless what kind of toolbox you have, if the only thing in that toolbox is a hammer, sooner or later everything starts looking like a nail. And that's the worst thing that could happen is trying to do the same thing over and over, the same tool, if you will, for every approach. So understanding our skills and abilities that we've picked up from the military helps us to fill our toolbox with all the different opportunities that we have to serve others, yet in a different capacity.
So hopefully we've convinced you that it's really important to take your time with this exercise. Please do not rush through this. I know that you want to keep moving forward. We certainly appreciate that. But if you rush through it, the odds of you getting to the place where you ultimately want to go are lessened. Better that it takes a little more time to get to where you want to go than you rush through it and not get there. So once you've taken this inventory, once you've taken the necessary time and you've come up with what you believe is the most complete picture of your skills, it's now time to assess those skills against your ideal transition. So what I'd like you to do next is take out the ideal transition description that you wrote down as part of part 2 of our program. And you want to look at those two things side by side, your skills list and your ideal transition. And then circle the skills on your list that you believe are applicable to your ideal transition. Next, you want to look at those skills. Look at the skills that you've circled. And look at your ideal transition again. Ask yourself, do any of the skills that I've circled need to be enhanced in some way? This is what Dr. Rich was just referring to. Are there any additional skills you're going to need to achieve that ideal transition? And if there are, then this is where you write them down. It is possible, it may even be likely, that the skills that you have are not exactly what you need or where you need them to be for your ideal transition. I think that would be the more common situation, and that's okay, because now once you know what you need to do in terms of either enhancing a skill you already have or attaining a skill that you don't have yet, it's easy enough to get them. Rich, that's pretty accurate, right? I mean, most people, when they look at their ideal transition versus their existing skill set, there's going to be a gap somewhere.
There usually is, John, and that's because we look at what we really want to do in our transition. Now we're really getting down to the nitty-gritty of it and making sure that we have the right skills and abilities. I'd also suggest here that what's possible, and it's okay to go back, because sometimes now people, when they go through a skills assessment and they put this inventory together, as we go back into the second part of our program, which we talked about a few seconds ago, they might realize that, wait a minute, I have different skills that I didn't realize. And so now that perfect transition may change, because now somebody may realize, particularly a senior enlisted person who's getting out after 20, maybe 25 or 30 years, they start to realize, well, wait a minute, I could be a great mentor or a coach for other people and be a life coach and get into the helping of other people, because as a senior enlisted person, they spend a lot of time one-on-one and with groups coaching and mentoring people along the way, particularly the younger troops as they come into the military. It's the senior enlisted that are really working with them. So in essence, when we do the skills assessment, it may cause us to rethink what is our perfect transition as far as the role or responsibility we want to do for a career. And that's okay, because a plan is a plan. The good thing here is that's the value of going through the skills assessment, because it helps us to think now, yes, from the bigger picture to the smaller picture, if you will, but it also takes us through an opportunity to say, wait a minute, I may want to do something different because I didn't realize something before.
Absolutely. And in the same way that we were just speaking earlier about writing down that initial inventory and then walking away from it for a while and then coming back to it, the same thing happens with your ideal transition. You may have written something down and now you've walked away from it, but you're coming back from it, you have a slightly different perspective, and maybe the ideal transition changes, and that's okay. In fact, again, not an uncommon situation, perfectly acceptable as well. And the important thing is that at the end of this entire process, you're happy with both the transition, or in this, if we're looking at this as a journey, the destination, as well as the plan that you have in place to get there.
A plan, John, is always just a plan. It's great to have a plan, but every once in a while we do have to go back at that plan, and we have to make sure it's accurate, make sure it's on time, and we adjust it as need be. The problem is with too many people, even with organizations, is that they come up with a plan and they fail to look at it at a regular basis and assess it to make sure it's still accurate. And those who don't tend to then go on a path which is no longer valid, whereas those organizations and people who look at their plan on a regular basis, they're able to adjust it and change it and stay accurate both for what they want to do and for what's available to them to do.
Absolutely. You know, as I've worked with clients over the last 12 or 13 years, I found that this has actually become an increasingly common problem, especially because the opportunities now are changing at an even faster pace. So companies and individuals who had plans, business plans in place, marketing plans in place for a particular goal 2 or 3 years ago need to revise those plans quite a lot because it's 3 years later, and what's happening over the course of 2 or 3 years nowadays is so much more vast. The changes are so much more vast than what was happening over the course of 2 or 3 years, say 10 years ago. And if you're still working the same plan, like step by step by step, without reassessing on a regular basis, you may not be doing the most efficient or most effective thing, the most efficient or effective steps that you can take for yourself.
Well, you know, John, in the business setting, it was not uncommon that organizational leaders would take a week away or a weekend away, and they would do an annual strategic plan, and they would look at, you know, what happened in the last year or so and plan out, like you said, for the next, you know, year plus. But the reality is that, as you noted, there's so many changes going on in the environment, so many things happening in technology, so many different things happening through government regulations these days that sometimes as an organization completes their annual plan, 6 months into it, that plan is no longer as valid as it was. And if they don't do anything at that point and they wait another 6 months, they lose an opportunity, and therefore the plan is no longer valid. So therefore the strategies that align with that plan are no longer viable, and the objectives that people are working on to support that plan are useless because it's not valid anymore. So this is a critical point for people to understand that annual cycles or not looking at a plan on a regular basis can be very detrimental. And that's one of the things I promote with the people I work with, the clients that I coach, is that every time they get a chance to look at their plan, and I encourage them to do it every 30 days just to make sure that's still viable and practical.
Absolutely. And so if you're worrying about whether or not you can change something that you've written down already, please understand that you absolutely can. And in many cases, if you feel like you should, you probably should. So don't let that worry you. Don't let that stop you from moving forward.
I think it's really important what you just said. If it feels like you need to do something about it, then do something about it. Because what's happening there is our subconscious is telling us something's wrong, we need some attention here. And I think that's a good way to listen to our inner voice, if you will, that when we believe or we get a sense or a feeling that something's wrong, that's probably true, and it's probably correct, because what's going on is internally we're seeing something that we're just not really paying enough attention to. So something on the inside of us and our subconscious mind perhaps is saying, wait a minute, stop, look at this.
And it's almost always the subconscious that picks it up before it becomes part of your conscious. Maybe if you spend a lot of time in your car, there's a little noise in the car, and you think to yourself, "Am I hearing something?" And you start to doubt yourself, but you realize that I wouldn't be thinking this if on some level I wasn't picking up a problem. It's the same thing with doing the skills assessment and looking at your ideal transition. If there's a strange sound, if something seems a little off, it probably is a little off, and you absolutely should pay attention to that.
This is the same, John, as in the field or in the military, and we've seen movies about this. We've seen this in military exercises, that there's somebody that senses something isn't right in the environment, and whether it's just they sense that an enemy's coming closer, they sense there's something wrong with the wind or the smell, something that's just not exactly right. Those people have a sense, they're actually noticing something, And those who realize that and stop at that moment and give it some thought and some credit do much better than those who just say, oh, that's nothing, no big deal, and not worry about it. So you call it sixth senses, our sixth sense and things like that that happen to us are the most important things to remember to have a successful life or a successful career, because these are the things we just need to be more aware of, to understand and give it some thought.
So if you did write down any skills that needed to be enhanced in some way, if you did write down any additional skills that you felt like you were going to need for your transition, the next thing you have to figure out is what's the plan to either enhance or acquire those necessary skills. Is it going to be additional reading that you'd need? Is there some training that you're going to need to come by? Or is there formal education that's going to be involved here? Whatever it is, you want to go back to your timeline from part 2 and make sure that these plans are part of that timeline.
Those 3 items that you talked about, John, about additional reading, training, and education, are great to look at and then find out what's the best route to get them. In some cases, much of what we need to improve our skills is free. It just may take us a little time to go on the internet or to go to the library or to talk with other people to find out exactly how you can acquire those skills.
And many of you who are listening to this program, remember that you have the opportunity to acquire this training and this education as part of your service. And so you should always look into the opportunities that are available to you as a military service member, as a veteran.
The Veterans Administration is a great place, John, for people to go to and find out about all the different benefits they have when they get out of the military. When you get out of the military, they do put us through a transition program to help us understand better how to adapt to the civilian community and how to make that transition as good as it possibly can be. And they do address that there. Unfortunately, too many people either don't attend all the sessions or they don't think it's important. But there's a saying, a chance favors the prepared, so why not go to the VA, whether it be online or to a local office, and find out all the different options that are available in regards to training and education and all the benefits that are provided to the military member.
Absolutely. I mean, guys, you put your time in, you absolutely deserve all of the benefits that are coming to you. No doubt about it. Take advantage of those benefits. So, some important things to remember here. The planning process takes time, and give it whatever time it needs. It's more important to get it done right than it is to get it done fast. Do not rush through this. If you rush through this, you're not going to get a complete picture, you're not going to get an accurate picture, and ultimately, because of that, you're not going to be as successful as you could be in this process. Now, we're going to make this, again, easier for you. As we did in part 2, underneath this video, you're going to find downloadable templates for both your skills inventory list as well as your skills assessment. We're also going to give you some examples of both lists to help you visualize the exercise. And, of course, if you have any questions at all, you can always contact us at admin@ProProgressAcademy.com. So your next steps are to download the templates, review the examples, take your skills inventory, create your skills list, and then assess those skills. When you're ready, and only when you're ready, proceed then to part 4. Rich, do you have any final thoughts for this lesson?
I do, John, and I think it's important for this military member as they're going through the skills inventories, once they get it put together, that if they have a significant other, children, their family members, is to then sit down with them also, because a lot of times the family members perceive one's skills and abilities a little bit different. So going to the next step and opening up this skills inventory to take into account what others have to say, particularly loved ones, because when you're looking at creating this skills inventory and looking to plan for a future career, it's often misunderstood or not given enough credit to that the family members can really put input into this and have help about this, particularly if they have adult children and their spouse, because these people provide yet another piece of feedback. And the extra piece of feedback or two is often what is needed to be able to see something that we don't see within ourselves.
That is a fantastic piece of advice, and absolutely share with your family and get their perspective. They know you better than just about anybody else. Absolutely. Rich, thank you so much for being here. Guys, when you're ready, we'll see you in part 4. This is John Sanpetro. Thank you for being part of basic training for the transitioning military veteran. Okay.